Welcome to our fourth episode of the ADHD and Me podcast. We've got a very interesting podcast episode for you today. We're going to be discussing the topic of, do adults with ADHD need the ADHD label or the diagnosis? And joining me today, I have a good friend who has a bit of a different view to mine, but that's always good. It keeps things interesting. Hi, Steph. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yes, I'm good, thank you. Thank you very much for joining me to discuss this issue, because I know
Not a problem.
There's going to be people, I think, on both sides of the fence about this. And this basically came from the fact we met up for a coffee and we were just having a general chat. And I was telling you that I was setting up as a CIC, community interest company for ADHD and me. And we were talking around that. And one of the things that came up was that you think you've got ADHD potentially, but you're not interested in pursuing a diagnosis. So let's start at the beginning. When did you kind of think that you possibly could have ADHD?
Well, my son has been kind of going through a referral on and off since he was very young. Probably, I think the first time we kind of tried was when he was in year 2 and got bounced back and everything. And then we tried again when he was in year 6. So I know a lot about additional needs because I'm a teacher as well. And then I've got the personal kind of experience as well of additional needs from home. But it was actually a lady that I got speaking to on Facebook who was misdiagnosed with BPD. And then finally diagnosed with female ADHD. And she was just sharing the way that it presents, which obviously is very different to your typical kind of male ADHD in boys and things like that. And it was every single thing she posted, it was like a aha moment. And I was like, I'm ticking every single box. So things like I would put a wash on and I would have to wash it 3 or 4 times because I get distracted and forget about it.
You're talking about me as well here.
And things like, my Facebook is infamous for burning pizza because I get distracted. I forget to put a timer on. So an air fryer to me has been revolutionary, and it's things like that.
I'm thinking of getting an air fryer. That's a bit off topic, but
honestly, it's the best thing. It has literally changed my life in terms of food. Also, I overthink everything. I'm a people pleaser. My mind goes at 100 miles an hour, and I've always felt that was my fault. If you see what I mean, that's just that's how I am, and all of these things. And I've had therapy through a car accident, and a lot of things came up about the fact that I don't think I'm good enough, and the evidence out there. What's the evidence? And I could quite easily create evidence, which isn't evidence. It's my interpretation of evidence. So all of these things kind of reasonably recently made me go, do you know what, actually I'm ticking more and more boxes, which makes sense because obviously my son is going through a referral for ADHD and autism, going to be in the family. And actually it was like, okay, yes, it makes sense. Trying to get any diagnosis is a huge, undertaking.
And I just want to pick up on a few different things you said there. The first of all, the therapy that brought up a lot of stuff about self-blame and overthinking. That's really interesting you say, because I've had therapy. One of the things that came out of that I blame myself for a lot of stuff that's perhaps beyond my control. So I'm wondering if that's maybe an ADHD thing, because obviously I'm assuming with the overthinking, that could potentially lead to a lot of self-circling. A lot of us with ADHD, I think, especially the high-functioning ADHD, where it's kind of like a deeper level of thinking, I think we kind of reflect quite a lot. Would you say that's accurate for you?
Absolutely. I think that for me, and I think it's quite common, especially in females, is that we are incredibly self-critical and overanalyze everything we say and think and do. And I think one of the big things, which is, I think, a common trait with a lot of people with ADHD, is that we talk a lot. And I know that I try to relate it to myself, not to take over, but because that's my way of showing empathy.
Connect with people.
But the problem with that is that then I find that when I then come away from it, I'm then, oh my goodness, did I take over the conversation? Did I yeah, that this wasn't about
Yeah.
me, this was about them.
When I was an education lecturer, I actually made friends with the counsellors, big shock, free therapy. So I remember one of them pointing out to me, and it wasn't said in a very negative way about me or, any comment on me as an individual, but one of them said, when people say, oh yeah, I've been through something similar, it's not helpful to people who've experienced that. And I never got what they meant at all until I actually did some training through my fostering agency. And I think it was about trauma and kind of how we like internalize things and all that kind of stuff. And it said that the better way to approach somebody is to talk about to basically say to them, I understand how you're feeling. What do you need from me right now?
Obviously taking it slightly away from my personal experience of either me or my son.
Yeah.
I've taught for almost 23 years and I've done a lot of work with SEN. I've done a lot of work with children, young children, in terms of just having relationships with them in the classroom and that kind of thing. And I do think there is definitely a place for using your own examples and your own life to help others to understand themselves. So I think it's just a balance.
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely.
It's a balance.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually saying to my therapist today, when telling him about a certain situation, that I'd rather have a teacher who not only has the knowledge but has lived it. Do you know what I mean? Who's going to know more?
Yeah.
Somebody who's read loads of books, or somebody who's experienced that. And I always prefer experience, but maybe that's just because I've always struggled with the academic side.
I know. I think you're right. I think that it's just a case of that we have to be careful that we don't take over the conversation as such. I think that's definitely, a time and a place for I understand how you're feeling kind of thing.
But also I was thinking, one of the things that I do in conversation, I don't know if you do this, because obviously with young kids that with ADHD, they tend to interrupt quite a lot because their brain's going so fast and they want to share. And I think as adults with ADHD, we tend to have an element of that we want to say what we've just thought of before we forget what we're going to say. Sometimes I'll be like, word vomit, because I actually don't want to forget what I wanted to say.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I totally agree. Totally agree. From my kind of point of view, because I'm a single mum, obviously, you know how that is. Yeah. It's that you spend a lot of time without adults around you. And so therefore, when you do get to have those conversations with other adults, I think you've got both the ADHD side of things, but also that kind of, oh my goodness, there's another adult, I need to just tell them everything.
Well, one of the things I was going to say to you is I actually did a series like a while ago now. I think it was last year. It could have been the year before because, life is one big blur. I did a series for my blog called The Late Bloomers of ADHD, and I actually talked to a lot of women like yourself who didn't realise they had ADHD until later on in life. Some of them chose to see, all of them, I think there was one who hadn't sought a diagnosis. Most of them had. One of the stories was actually very, very interesting because it was about a woman who had been sent to prison, and when she got out, she had a probation officer, and it was her probation officer that led her on the journey to being diagnosed with ADHD. But the thing she'd got sent to prison for was being addicted and dealing speed. Which is a medication used to treat ADHD. That's effectively what Ritalin is, what a lot of the medications for ADHD are, a moderated form of speed, which is why it's a controlled drug. I found in terms of the education system in its current form and the way it has to be taught due to funding and the curriculum and everything kind of taking on factors in, the best treatment for children with ADHD does tend to be medication.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one because obviously being a teacher myself, I think there are very, very few teachers out there who don't want the best for their classes and their children. And I think that there's much more understanding around ADHD. I think the issue is it's such a, ADHD can show itself in so many forms that we all can say, oh, they've got traits of ADHD, and we adapt our teaching to support those children. But obviously you've got lots of other children in the class at the same time. So it's about, you're constantly, as a teacher, adapting and having to, you've obviously got a curriculum that you have to teach, but you're constantly adapting for all the different types of personalities, the different learning styles, the attention levels, the male and female, the all sorts of different things, and you've got additional needs. And if a child doesn't have a diagnosis, it does make it more difficult, because everybody that I know personally would go out of their way to make sure that they treated that child not as if they've got a diagnosis, in terms of, they're not going to treat them differently, if you see what I mean, but they would make sure that they would adapt. So, for example, child that shows traits of ADHD, you'd make sure that you would give them an extra couple of opportunities before you gave them a warning or whatever it might be. That's the school policy. But I do think that there are, in the state system, it is, you follow obviously through the NHS. Obviously, I think one of the biggest issues is that every area has a different way of accessing support.
The postcode lottery.
Well, it's not even just postcode lottery, I don't think. I think it's the fact that every area is different. So, for example, I have a friend who's a teacher who has children who also have, most likely ADHD. And they asked me about, my experience. And I'm talking about, for example, in Warrington, the Child Development Centre. Well, that doesn't exist in other places. So there's no overall. What I would have expected was that, like with the NHS, in terms of, you need to see a specialist. You go through a certain list kind of thing before you get to that person. And that's what my expectation was going to be, that, well, this is what you do, this is how you get there. And I think a lot of the problem is obviously funding. A lot of the problem is the fact there aren't enough staff who are experts who can diagnose.
I also try to think of it from a child's point of view, because I think of myself as an adult if I'm in a classroom environment now. And even as an adult in a classroom environment, I still struggle because my brain is going so fast. I'm unmedicated. I have been since I was 17. So obviously my brain is going, really fast, doing all these things. So one of the coping strategies I use if I'm in any kind of learning environment is I do cross-stitching, to cope. My hands are doing something and I've got something else to focus on, so I can do two things at once, because that's a coping strategy that I have. And I say this I said that to say this, that a lot of teachers wouldn't allow that in a classroom. Obviously, I know cross-stitching is probably not a child-appropriate activity, sharp needle in the classroom. But, there seems to be this very kind of linear idea that if a child isn't acting in a certain way, behaviour-wise, that they're not taking anything in. For a child who has ADHD, the world is a very big and scary place. And sometimes I'm not one to advocate for medication, because I think it swings and roundabouts. I think it's a very individual choice for parents and also the person taking it. But I do think that when you're a child, it's so hard to cope, which is one of the reasons I said that medication seems to be the best form of treatment, because what that medication does is it slows the brain down enough to be able to operate at a normal level, which means they're able to partake in the education system in its current format. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. I definitely think the education system needs an overhaul, but whether we'll get that, I don't know.
The thing is that I think that it definitely depends on the individual. And it depends whether you're high functioning with ADHD as well, because, and also, yes, it does depend on who you have as a teacher, and but I do think that it's come a long way in terms of understanding, and we do have resources, for example, things like fiddle toys. Obviously, cross-stitching in a lesson, the problem with that is that the focus is on something completely different, and it takes quite a lot of focus. Now, that may work for one individual, but it can take away from another. So trying to find things
balance.
The balance. I mean, and also, you don't have to have ADHD to be somebody who fiddles, for example. There's a lot of children out there and a lot of adults that might fiddle with pens and things like that. And that's just because they like to keep their hands busy rather than, having an additional need. So it's something that I've done,
great.
for example.
Yeah, I think it's very different, because I think obviously there are good teachers like yourselves, and I'm not disputing there are many, many good teachers out there who do want the best for I've never met a teacher who doesn't want the best for their students.
Yeah.
But sometimes the way they go about that, particularly, I don't want to kind of draw any stereotypes, but particularly older generation teachers. I've been in a staff room on a student placement at one point, and I've overheard a teacher say, "Oh, how's such a body getting on with their ADHD diagnosis?" Only for another teacher to say, "Oh, well, we think he's going to get it, but you and I know it's just bad parenting, don't we?" And it's the kind of stereotypes like that. I mean, obviously, I didn't know that individual case, so perhaps, they have their own opinions on that. But I just don't think things like that are helpful when we're talking about ADHD, because there's already such a stigma of it being linked to bad parenting.
No, and I agree. I think a lot of the problems as well is the fact that children can present very differently at school than they do at home. And that was one of the problems I had with Wynne trying to get him diagnosed, is that school kept telling me that he didn't present at school. And my issue was, well, actually, from what you've told me in reports and parents' evenings and, the end of the day and things like that, then actually he does. But I think that is because there was a lack of understanding and awareness of what ADHD can look like, because it can be such a widespread,
and
kind
the
of
high
thing.
functioning aspect of it, I didn't even realize I had until I was in a conversation with another parent, when they said, "Oh, yeah, my child's not got high functioning ADHD," and I was like, "What does that mean? Like, is there a high functioning low?" But actually, it's interesting you say that your child's been going through the diagnosis for ADHD and autism, because the older I get, the more I become aware of my autistic tendencies. Now, I'm not saying I've got autism. That's not for me to decide. That's for the professionals. But I mean, not that I'm pursuing an autism diagnosis, but it's just I become a lot more aware of some of the characteristics. Like I do have OCD for certain things. I like things done in a particular way. And the more I find out about it, the more I think, oh, maybe I was one of the people who was misdiagnosed, and perhaps I have autism as well as ADHD.
There is, a definite overlap between ADHD and autism. And so therefore it's difficult, I suppose, to diagnose. And also autism is not just a case of, do you tick these boxes type thing. There's a lot that goes into into the diagnosis. So I think that it is very difficult, for children who are high functioning, I suppose, at the end of the day. We associate that with autism, but they are children who can conform and can, actually in a way thrive better in a school environment, because it's very routine and, and there's a clear hierarchy, but then completely kind of, I used to call it like the volcano effect, that by the end of the day, they'd held themselves in such a way for such a long time that everything would come out and the world would explode, and then you would have this whole cycle that would come out at home. And I think that what there seems to be, now I don't know, because I've not obviously been through the full referral process yet, but having gone round it once and jumped through every hoop known to man, including parenting courses, which when you're a qualified teacher who has helped set up an SEN department, you kind of think, I'll do anything for my child to get the support. But you kind of think, crikey, are we not wasting time on things? The reason that all came about was because it used to have to be that they presented the same at school and at home. Whereas what seems to have happened nowadays is that there is this greater understanding, which will come with time, that children do not necessarily present the same at home and at school. That's a huge thing to think. But also, I think it's worth saying, we're not excusing every behaviour as, oh, hang on a minute, have they got an additional need? At the end of the day, whether you've got ADHD, autism, whether you have got mental illness, whether you have got nothing, whatever it may be or not, we all have our emotions, we all have hormones, we all have ups and downs, we all have those times.
I just want to put two things to you, really. So I don't know if you watched I'm a Celeb recently. It was kind of hit and miss for me, but one of the contestants on there has ADHD and actually ended up winning the competition. but they were actually talking about their ADHD while they were in there. And one of the things they said that is they wish they'd have been diagnosed when they were a child, because it would have changed how they felt about themselves, which, to be honest, was a bit interesting to me, because I was diagnosed at 10 and I don't think it changed how I felt about myself, because I didn't have an understanding of what ADHD is. I presented like a boy with ADHD, which I know sounds very stereotypical, but I was very impulsive, very loud in the classroom, very disruptive. I wasn't academic. I was kind of average. I was your average Joe with difficult behaviour, and that's why my ADHD was picked up at such a young age. So it's interesting that you've said that. Did you have any issues in school, or?
I mean, I've got a bit of a background in that I'm partially deaf, so I spent a lot of time in hospital when I was younger.
Right. Okay.
And we moved house as well. So I didn't say boo to a goose. I literally said nothing to anybody.
Yeah. So you were like very.
I was more of a traditional kind of, well, in terms of, you know, if you're trying to kind of female to male kind of traits. But I think the thing is, had I been diagnosed as a child, I don't think it would have made a difference, purely because I don't think that we really understood ADHD and things like that in the way that we do now.
I think out there in the world, in society, in people in general, I'm not so sure there is, because there's still a lot of stigma and ignorance. But one of the things I wanted to say, and coming back to what you've just said about we've got to be careful we don't go too much the other way, what I'm seeing on LinkedIn and quite a few other places on social media are a lot of teenagers, a lot of younger people who have certain symptoms and are basically diagnosing themselves with ADHD. They're not saying, I think I have it. They're not saying, oh, I think I'm going to seek a diagnosis. Basically, what they're saying is, I have ADHD. I have ADHD. You can't tell me otherwise. And I think we've got to be very careful, because it's not that I'm invalidating what these people are saying. These people deserve to be heard. And obviously, I'm a big fan of advocating for the diagnosis waiting times to be completely overhauled, because they're not good enough. But I think what that does is it takes ADHD from a genuine medical condition diagnosed from a doctor to a personality trait. And I think that's because there's obviously a lot of us with ADHD who want to be taken seriously, who obviously it's not because we want to be victims, it's just we want people to know this is how our brain works differently. But then we're getting, you know, people saying, oh, it's not a real condition. And then we're saying, well, it is, it's a medical diagnosis. And then you've got other people who are just saying, no, I have it anyway.
No, 100%. And I think that that's where, you know, we kind of started off having our conversation, you know, in the coffee shop, in that I totally agree with you that
there's got to be a balance,
medical, it has to be a balance. It's a medical diagnosis. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that I would ever say I have ADHD, because without a diagnosis, I don't think that I'm qualified to say that. What I am qualified to say is that knowing myself inside out and having a child going through a referral where quite often it is hereditary, if it was a case of that you could go and get a diagnosis very quickly and easily, then I probably would go and get one.
Right.
Because then,
so what puts you off is the actual whole kind of like waiting and the bad referral processes in place at the moment.
I don't think for me at this point in time that it's going to benefit me or anybody else by having that formal, yes, I've got it, because I'm not going to get medication at the moment, things like that. But it's purely for a bit of a aha moment.
Where validation. I was going through validation of like why you do things differently and why you struggle in certain areas.
Yeah. Okay. I'd more like to get a diagnosis if it meant that it would make Wynn's referral process easier, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Steph. I think you've got some really valid points. It's a really interesting debate. And I think it's probably worth revisiting at some point. So thank you very much for joining us.
No problem. Thank you.